She believed he was just a hired date. A stranger she could return at the end of the night. She had no idea she was standing beside the man who would change her life forever. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne. Claire stood beside him, radiant in a simple black dress, smiling at donors who would never know the truth. His hand rested gently on her waist. Professional. Respectful. Perfectly appropriate for a hired date. But his heart was racing. She had no idea who he really was. No idea that the chef she'd found online, the man she'd hired for 6 months to cook for charity events, owned 12 Michelin-starred restaurants. That his family name opened doors she couldn't imagine. That he'd lied about everything except the one thing that mattered most. He was falling in love with her. And when she found out the truth, she would never forgive him. But how did they get here? Let me take you back. The test kitchen at his family's Hamptons estate was silent except for the steady rhythm of his knife against the cutting board. Alexander Carrington stood alone in the space he designed himself, surrounded by copper pots and imported marble counters, and felt absolutely nothing. 38 years old. CEO designate of the Carrington restaurant empire. Heir to 3 Michelin stars and a reputation built over 4 decades. His father's legacy. His father's name. His father's everything. Never his own. The afternoon light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the stainless steel surfaces gold. Outside, the Atlantic crashed against the cliffs. Beautiful. Empty. Like everything else in his life. He set down the knife and stared at his hands. These hands had prepared meals for presidents, celebrities, critics who could make or break careers with a single review. But whose skill were they praising? His? Or the Carrington name that preceded him into every kitchen, every dining room, every conversation? The memory surfaced unbidden, sharp as the blade he'd just been using. Vanessa's voice, sharp and public and devastating. He'd been listening to her podcast, the one she'd built using his connections, his kitchens, his trust, when she'd said it. Talentless Nepo baby riding daddy's Michelin stars. 2 years of I love you. 2 years of her hand in his at restaurant openings, her smile when he'd introduced her to his father, her promises that she saw him, really saw him. And that's what she'd really thought all along. The worst part? He couldn't prove her wrong. How could he? Every door that opened for him had Carrington engraved above it. Every compliment came with an asterisk. Every success tasted like borrowed glory, diluted by doubt. His phone buzzed on the counter. His father. Again. 3rd call today. He let it ring. Richard Carrington wanted to discuss succession planning. Wanted Alexander to officially take over as CEO. Wanted to announce it at the annual Michelin ceremony next month. Wanted. Never asked what Alexander wanted. Alexander moved to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. The ocean stretched endlessly before him. Freedom, just out of reach. What did he want? He wanted to know. That was it. Simple and impossible. He needed to know if he had value beyond the name. If someone would hire him, respect him, value him, without Carrington opening the door first. The decision formed slowly, like a reduction coming together, elements combining into something new. He needed to strip away everything. Start over. Prove himself to himself. His laptop sat on the counter. He opened it, navigated to a freelance platform he'd never needed before, and stared at the blank profile page. This was insane. He was the heir to a restaurant empire. He had responsibilities. Expectations. A legacy to uphold. But whose legacy? And when would it become his own? His fingers moved across the keyboard before he could overthink it. Name, Alex Morgan. His mother's maiden name. The only part of his identity that felt untethered from his father's shadow. She'd died when he was 12, but he remembered her hands teaching him to make pasta, her laugh when he'd gotten flour everywhere, her voice saying, "Cooking is about feeding souls, Alex. Not impressing critics." Experience, 10 years professional cooking. Specialties, French technique, seasonal menus, private events. Rate, negotiable. No mention of Carrington. No photos from Forbes features or Michelin ceremonies. No awards or accolades or famous clients. Just skills and availability. He stared at the screen for a long moment. This was crossing a line. Deceptive. Wrong. But he couldn't stop himself. He hit publish. The listing went live. His phone stayed silent. The kitchen stayed empty. The ocean kept crashing, indifferent to his crisis of identity. And for the first time in months, he felt something close to hope. Maybe someone would hire Alex Morgan for what he could do. Not for who Alexander Carrington's father was. He had no idea that decision would change everything. 3 weeks later, Claire Morgan sat in her cramped office at Hope Foundation, staring at her computer screen with growing desperation. The charity gala was in 9 days. 9 days. And Chef Raymond had just canceled, citing a better-paying corporate event. She wanted to scream. Instead, she pressed her fingers against her temples and took 3 slow breaths. Screaming wouldn't help. Screaming wouldn't find her a chef who could cook for 60 people on a non-profit budget. Her office was barely larger than a closet. 1 desk, 1 chair, 1 window that overlooked a brick wall. The foundation couldn't afford better. Couldn't afford much of anything, which was why this gala mattered so desperately. The director had been painfully clear. Claire, this event determines our funding for the next year. We need to prove to donors that we're professional, capable, worth their investment. I need you to make it work. No pressure. She opened her laptop, ignoring the crack in the screen she couldn't afford to fix, and pulled up her budget spreadsheet. After venue rental, decorations, and basic supplies, she had exactly $837 left. That wouldn't get her anyone with real credentials. Barely enough for a culinary student. But she needed someone who could cook for 60 people and look presentable enough to stand beside her when donors arrived expecting polish and competence. Her phone buzzed. Text from her roommate. Rent's due Friday. You good? She wasn't good. Her paycheck barely covered rent and student loans. But she typed back, yeah, all set. Another small lie to add to the pile of things she'd deal with later. Focus. She needed to focus. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Chef for hire, New York, affordable, available immediately. The results were disappointing. Catering companies wanted thousands. Private chefs were booked solid through spring. She scrolled deeper, past the polished websites and professional portfolios, into the smaller listings where desperation met opportunity. Then she saw it. Alex Morgan. Freelance chef. French technique, seasonal menus, private events. Available immediately. Rate negotiable. The profile was bare bones. 1 stock photo of a cutting board and fresh herbs. No fancy website. No list of celebrity clients or Michelin stars or Food Network appearances. Just simple, direct information. Professional but humble. Something about it felt right. Or maybe she was just out of options. She clicked his message button before she could second-guess herself. Hi Alex, I'm coordinating a charity gala in 9 days and my chef just canceled. Budget is limited but the cause is important, helping families in crisis access resources and support. Would you be interested? She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then added the part that made her feel slightly ridiculous. Also, this might sound unusual, but I need a date for the evening as well. Professional appearance only, standing beside me during donor interactions. The foundation director thinks it looks more established if I'm not attending solo. I know it's unconventional. Let me know if you're available. Claire Morgan, Hope Foundation. She hit send before she could delete it. Then she waited. Minutes crawled by. She tried to work on other things, failed, checked her email compulsively. Nothing. An hour passed. 2. 3. Maybe he thought she was insane. Maybe the whole request was too weird. Maybe he'd already found better paying work and hadn't updated his profile. Her phone buzzed 4 hours later, just as she was giving up hope. Unknown number. MS. Morgan, this is Alex. I'd be happy to help with your event. The cause matters more than the budget. When can we meet to discuss the menu? And yes, I can serve as your date for the evening. Professional only. Exactly what you need. Looking forward to working with you. Relief flooded through her so fast she had to sit down, hand pressed against her chest where her heart was hammering. She had a chef. She had a date. She had a chance. She typed back immediately. Thank you so much. Can you meet tomorrow? There's a cafe in Brooklyn, corner of Smith and Union. 2 p.m.? His response came within minutes. I'll be there. What she didn't have was any idea who she'd just hired. What she didn't know was that across town, in a Hamptons estate kitchen, Alexander Carrington was staring at his phone with something between terror and exhilaration, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. 2 days before the gala, Claire arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, coffee already cooling in front of her, contracts and menu notes spread across the small table like proof she knew what she was doing. She didn't know what she was doing. The cafe was one of those Brooklyn places that tried too hard, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs and overpriced lattes. But it was neutral territory, and she needed neutral. Needed professional. She smoothed down her dress, a simple navy cotton thing she'd worn to every interview and important meeting for the past 3 years. Professional armor. Then she checked her reflection in her phone screen. Presentable. Tired, but presentable. The door chimed. She looked up. And her first thought was that he didn't look like a struggling freelance chef. He was tall, well over 6 feet, lean in the way that suggested disciplined physicality rather than deprivation. Dark hair slightly too long, curling at his collar. Wearing simple black jeans and a charcoal sweater that fit perfectly, expensive in a way she recognized from years of serving wealthy donors. Clean-shaven. Elegant. Composed. The kind of presence that made people look twice without understanding why. When his eyes found hers across the cafe, something in her chest tightened. Professional, she reminded herself. This is professional. He smiled as he approached. Warm. Genuine. Nothing performative about it, no attempt to impress or charm. Just a smile that reached his eyes and made small lines appear at the corners. Claire? He extended his hand. Alex Morgan. His handshake was firm. Confident. She noticed calluses on his fingers and palm. Working hands. Good. Real. Thank you for meeting me, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I know this is last minute. Last minute usually means it matters, he said, sitting down with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in any environment. Tell me about the event. She explained, trying to sound more confident than she felt. 60 donors, mostly older professionals who'd supported the foundation for years. Simple elegance, nothing showy. Food needed to be excellent but not intimidating. She had $837, and she'd understand if that wasn't workable. He didn't flinch at the budget. Didn't suggest she was asking for the impossible or offer that condescending smile she'd gotten from other chefs. He just pulled out a small leather notebook, expensive but worn at the edges, and started writing. Seasonal vegetable tartare to start, he said quietly, pen moving across the page. Herb-crusted cod for the main, locally sourced from the market near Red Hook. Honey panna cotta for dessert, garnished with edible flowers. Everything elegant, nothing pretentious. Your donors will feel valued, not impressed. There's a difference. She stared at him. That sounds perfect. But can we do that on my budget? I have relationships with suppliers. I can make it work. He met her eyes. Something in his gaze was different from anyone she'd worked with before. Focused. Present. Like he actually cared about this, not just the paycheck. Your donors will remember this meal. I promise you that. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. You clearly have skills. Training. You could be charging 5 times what I'm paying, working in established restaurants. Why freelance for charity events? For a moment, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or longing. A shadow that passed so quickly she almost missed it. Sometimes it's not about the money, he said carefully, each word chosen with precision. Sometimes it's about being valued for the work itself, not the credentials or connections that came before it. Does that make sense? She understood that more than he could possibly know. How many times had donors questioned her age, her experience, suggested the foundation director should handle important conversations because Claire was just a coordinator? It makes perfect sense, she said quietly. Something passed between them then. Understanding. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both trying to prove something. Okay, she said, extending her hand across the table. You're hired. For the event and as my date. Professional only, he said, but there was warmth in his voice. Kindness that felt genuine. Professional only, she agreed, shaking his hand. But when his palm pressed against hers, warm and calloused and steady, something in her chest shifted. A feeling she immediately tried to suppress because this was a contract, nothing more, and she couldn't afford complications. She had no idea how wrong she was. She had no idea that across the table, Alexander was thinking the same thing, his heart racing in a way it hadn't since he'd been a teenager, wondering how someone he'd just met could make him feel so seen. The night of the gala, Claire arrived at the event space 4 hours early, hands shaking as she unlocked the door. This was it. Everything she'd worked for, everything that would determine whether she kept her job or joined the unemployment line. The venue had transformed overnight. White linens covered tables arranged in a horseshoe pattern. String lights hung from exposed beams, casting warm pools of light. Candles waited to be lit. Programs sat stacked on the welcome table, each one listing her name as event coordinator. It looked magical. It looked expensive. It looked like something people with real budgets created, not someone operating on prayers and borrowed decorations. She'd done this. Against every odd. Now she just needed the food to be perfect and the donors to be generous and her nerves to stop making her hands shake. Alex arrived 2 hours before guests were scheduled, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that made her heart skip in a way she absolutely could not acknowledge. He carried equipment bags and moved through the small prep kitchen with quiet efficiency, setting up stations with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She watched him work from the doorway, trying not to be obvious about it. His hands were steady, precise. He didn't rush or fumble or check recipes. Every movement had purpose, economy of motion that spoke to years of practice. "Need help?" she asked finally. He looked up. Smiled in that way that made her chest feel warm. "I've got this. You focus on your guests and your speech. I'll make sure the food is perfect. And after the meal? You remember you're my date, right?" "I remember." His eyes met hers, something warm flickering there. "Don't worry, Claire. I'll make you look good." "I think you've already done that," she said before she could stop herself. His expression shifted. Surprise. Pleasure. Something else she couldn't quite name. Then the moment passed, and she forced herself to move away, to check on decorations and programs and all the other details that needed her attention. But she felt his gaze following her, warm and steady, making her skin tingle in ways that were entirely inappropriate for an employer-employee relationship. The first guests arrived at 7. Claire stood at the entrance in her one good dress, a simple black sheath she'd bought secondhand 3 years ago, and greeted donors with a confidence she didn't quite feel. Then Alex appeared beside her, hand gently touching her elbow, and suddenly she could breathe. "Good evening," he said to the arriving couples with perfect courtesy. Not servile. Not arrogant. Just present, offering exactly the right amount of attention and deference. They moved through the room together. He was effortless, somehow. Knew when to speak and when to listen. Asked thoughtful questions about donors' work, their families, their interests. Made the older couples feel important without being obsequious. Laughed at their stories with genuine warmth. She kept stealing glances at him, confused and slightly unsettled. He was a freelance chef working for $800. But he carried himself like someone who'd attended 1,000 events like this. Who belonged in rooms full of wealth and influence. Who knew instinctively how to navigate social hierarchies. Who was he really? The appetizer course began. Claire watched anxiously as servers placed small plates in front of guests. The vegetable tartare looked like art, tiny precise arrangements of color and texture. She held her breath as the first donor took a bite. The woman's eyes widened. "Oh my God. This is extraordinary." Relief made Claire's knees weak. The main course was equally stunning. Herb-crusted cod with fingerling potatoes and asparagus, each plate a small masterpiece. Guests murmured appreciation. Asked for the chef's name. Requested recipes. The foundation director pulled Claire aside after dessert, eyes shining with an emotion that looked suspiciously like pride. "Wherever you found this chef, keep him," she said firmly. "This is the best gala we've ever held. The board is thrilled." Claire's throat tightened. "Thank you. It means a lot. You did well, Claire. Really well." It was the first time the director had ever said her name with respect instead of mild exasperation. At the end of the night, after the last guest left and the catering staff cleaned up, Claire found Alex in the small kitchen, wiping down counters with the same care he'd shown preparing every dish. "Thank you," she said quietly, voice rough with exhaustion and relief and something else. "You were incredible." He turned. Smiled. But there was something sad in his eyes, a shadow she didn't understand. "Just doing the job." "No." She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes were more gray than brown in the dim kitchen light. "You went beyond. Way beyond. Every dish was perfect. Every conversation was genuine. You made this event special." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Heavy. Important. Dangerous. "Claire," he started, voice low. Then stopped. Swallowed. "I should tell you something." Her phone buzzed in her clutch. The foundation director. She glanced at the screen. "Hold that thought," she said, and answered. "Hello? Claire, the board just finished deliberating. They're thrilled with tonight's success. They want to fund a series. 6 charity events over 6 months, same format. Can you coordinate?" Her heart stopped. Actually stopped, then started racing double time. This was the promotion she'd been hoping for. This was everything she'd worked toward for 3 years. This was validation and security and proof she could do this. "Yes," she breathed. "Absolutely yes." "Good. Use the same team. Especially that chef. He's brilliant. The board specifically requested him." She hung up. Turned to Alex, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "They want 6 more events," she said, words tumbling out fast. "1 a month for 6 months. Bigger budget. Better exposure. I need a chef I can count on." She paused, heart hammering. "I need you." He went very still. 6 months? I can offer a contract. Not a lot of money at first, but steady work. And I'd need you as my date for each event. Professional only. Same arrangement." She was talking too fast, knew it, couldn't stop. "If you're interested. If you have the availability. I'd understand if you don't, if you have other commitments, but I wanted to ask because you're perfect for this and the board specifically." "I accept," he said quietly. She stopped mid-sentence. "Really? Really?" He extended his hand. 6 months. You've got yourself a chef and a date." She shook his hand, felt the warmth of his palm against hers, the connection that held a beat too long to be purely professional. "Thank you, Alex. Thank you for giving me a chance," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "For seeing what I can do." Neither of them knew this handshake was sealing something far more significant than a contract. Neither of them knew 6 months would never be enough. Neither of them knew they'd just made the best and most dangerous decision of their lives. By the second event in late October, they'd fallen into an easy rhythm that felt both comfortable and unsettling. Alex arrived 3 hours before each gala, moving through prep kitchens with quiet efficiency. Claire coordinated volunteers and decorations, checked in with donors, managed the 1,000 small crises that arose. And when guests arrived, they stood together. His hand on her waist, warm and steady. Her laughter at something he whispered, genuine and surprised. To everyone watching, they looked like a couple. Perfectly matched. Perfectly natural. The problem was, it felt natural too. Too natural. Claire tried not to notice how his hand felt against the small of her back, how he'd learned to read her stress levels from across a room, stepping in to deflect demanding donors when she looked overwhelmed. Tried not to notice how he remembered she took her coffee black with 1 sugar, or how he'd started bringing her tea when she worked late at the foundation office. He was professional. Always professional. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Hunger, maybe. Or longing. Quickly suppressed, but there. 3 weeks after the second event, she was working late in her cramped office when her phone rang. "Alex." "Hey," she answered, surprised. They didn't usually talk between events unless it was about menu planning. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine." His voice sounded different. Uncertain. I made too much stock at the test kitchen and thought maybe you'd want some for dinner." She blinked at her computer screen, where a budget spreadsheet glared back at her. "You want to bring me soup? If you haven't eaten. You mentioned you'd be working late tonight." Something warm bloomed in her chest, dangerous and lovely. "Where are you?" "Brooklyn." "Your office is on the way home." It absolutely wasn't. She knew exactly where he lived from the address on his contract, a modest apartment in Queens that was nowhere near her Williamsburg office. But she didn't correct him. Okay. Yes. Thank you. He arrived 20 minutes later with a large container of French onion soup that smelled like heaven, steam still rising when he opened it. She'd meant to just take it and say goodbye, maintain professional boundaries. But he hesitated at the door, and the words slipped out before she could stop them. Have you eaten? Not yet. Stay. I've got bread in my desk drawer. They sat in her tiny office, sharing soup and conversation that had nothing to do with events or menus. He asked about her work, really asked, leaning forward with focused attention as she talked about the foundation's programs, the families they helped, the difference they made in people's lives. You care a lot, he said quietly, watching her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. Of course I care. These are real people with real struggles. Single mothers trying to keep their kids fed. Elderly people choosing between medicine and heat. If we don't help them, who will? Not everyone would feel that way. His voice had gone soft. You could take easier jobs. Higher pay. Less stress. Fewer late nights in an office barely bigger than a closet. But would it matter? She met his eyes across the small desk, seeing her own soup container reflected in his pupils. I want to do work that means something. Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard. He smiled, sad and warm at the same time. I understand that more than you know. Do you? She studied him, this man who was still mostly a mystery after 2 months. Sometimes I feel like I don't really know you, Alex. You're this amazing chef working for charity wages. You're kind. Thoughtful. You show up when you say you will and go above what's required. But I don't know anything about your life before this. His jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, but she saw it. The way his fingers tensed around his spoon. The way his eyes went distant for a fraction of a second. Not much to tell, he said carefully, each word measured. I've been cooking for a long time. Worked in various kitchens. Trying to build something that matters, same as you. It wasn't the whole truth. She could feel the omission, the careful selection of details. But she didn't push because she didn't have the right, because this was an employer-employee relationship no matter how much it sometimes felt like something else. Well, I'm grateful you answered my ad, she said instead. I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have found someone else, he said quietly. You're resourceful. Determined. You make things work. Maybe. But I'm glad it was you. The words hung between them, heavier than they should be. So am I, he said, voice rough. And the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and fragile and important, made her heart race. This was dangerous. She knew it. He was her employee. This was professional. Had to stay professional. But when he left that night, she stood at her window watching him walk away into the October darkness, and wondered what it would be like if things were different. If he was just a man she'd met, and she was just a woman, and there were no contracts or complications between them. She had no idea things were about to get much more complicated. The third event was in mid-November, a Thanksgiving fundraiser at a historic brownstone in Park Slope. Claire arrived early to oversee setup, nerves making her movements quick and sharp. This event was bigger than the previous two. More donors. Higher stakes. The foundation director would be attending, bringing board members who held Claire's professional future in their hands. Alex arrived with boxes of ingredients, moving through the borrowed kitchen with that easy confidence she'd come to rely on. But today, something felt different. She noticed it first in the corner of her vision. A man, mid-40s, expensive suit that screamed hedge fund or private equity, watching the kitchen area with narrow, calculating eyes. She didn't recognize him. He wasn't on the guest list. She approached carefully, professional smile fixed in place. Can I help you? Marcus Beaumont, he said, extending a hand she didn't particularly want to shake but did anyway. Cold. Dry. I'm a restaurateur. Heard you had an excellent chef working these events. Thought I'd introduce myself. Something about his smile felt wrong. Too sharp. Too interested in a way that had nothing to do with charity work. I'm afraid we're setting up right now, she said politely but firmly. Guests don't arrive until 6. If you'd like to attend, I can add you to the list, but there is a minimum donation requirement. Of course. But he didn't leave. His eyes tracked Alex across the kitchen, following his movements with an intensity that made Claire's skin prickle. Your chef. What did you say his name was? I didn't. She kept her voice professional, but something protective flared in her chest. If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to finalize. She moved away before he could continue, found Alex in the kitchen chopping herbs with focused precision. Who's that guy? She asked quietly, leaning close enough to see the faint scar on his thumb, old knife wound probably. Alex glanced up. Saw Marcus standing in the doorway. And something cold passed across his face. Not anger. Fear. No one important, he said, but his hands had gone completely still on the cutting board. Alex? It's fine, Claire. Just focus on your event. But it wasn't fine. She could tell from the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, the tension radiating from him like heat from a stove. Marcus stayed through the entire dinner. Watched. Took notes in a small leather journal. Asked pointed questions about the food, the chef, the arrangement. Made Claire feel like a specimen under a microscope. When the guests finally left and the cleanup crew took over, Marcus approached her again. Impressive meal, he said, voice smooth as oil. Your chef has excellent technique. Quite refined for someone working charity events. Where did he train? I don't discuss my team's backgrounds with strangers, she said flatly. Of course not. He handed her a business card, black with silver lettering. Expensive. If you or your chef ever need a better opportunity, call me. I pay much better than nonprofits. And I reward talent appropriately. She took the card only to be polite, crumpling it in her palm the moment he turned away. That night, walking to the subway together through streets turned gold by streetlights, she asked Alex about it. That Beaumont guy. You knew him. I know of him, Alex corrected carefully, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He's in the restaurant business. Aggressive. Not someone I'd want to work for. Has he approached you? No. Not a lie, exactly. But not the whole truth either. Claire stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. The November wind was cold, biting, but she barely felt it. Alex, if something's wrong, you can tell me. I know we have a professional relationship, but I care about you. As a friend, if nothing else. He looked at her for a long moment, something complex and painful moving across his features. In the orange glow of the streetlight, his eyes looked darker, shadows pooling beneath them. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually say it. Whatever secret he was carrying. But then he just smiled, gentle and sad. Nothing's wrong, Claire. I promise. This job, working with you, it's the best thing I've done in years. The sincerity in his voice almost broke her. Okay, she said quietly. But if that changes, tell me? I will. Another lie. But neither of them knew it yet. December arrived with snow and the fourth event, a holiday gala at a hotel ballroom in Midtown. Claire wore a deep green velvet dress she'd found at a vintage shop, the nicest thing she'd ever owned. When Alex saw her, something in his expression shifted. Cracked open. Hunger and longing and something deeper, all there for a split second before he locked it away. You look beautiful, he said quietly, voice rough. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied, trying to keep it light even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. But the air between them felt different tonight. Charged. Like something was building, pressure increasing, ready to explode. The event was their most elegant yet. Ice sculptures shaped like winter trees. String quartet playing classical arrangements of holiday songs. Champagne flowing freely. Claire had outdone herself with the decorations, and Alex had created a menu that made donors actually applaud between courses. They moved through the evening as always, his hand on her waist, her laughter at something he whispered. But every touch felt electric now. Every shared glance carried weight. And somewhere between the third course and the donor speeches, Claire realized with absolute certainty that she'd stopped pretending. She wasn't developing feelings. She'd already fallen. Completely. Irrevocably. Stupidly. For a chef she barely knew. A man working for charity wages who treated her with more respect and kindness than anyone ever had. Who made her laugh. Who saw her, really saw her, not just the coordinator or the employee but the person underneath. It was completely inappropriate. He was her employee. This couldn't happen. shouldn't happen. But when he pulled her onto the dance floor after dinner, his hand warm and steady against her lower back, she couldn't make herself care about appropriate. "We don't have to dance," he said softly, giving her an out even as his fingers spread across the velvet covering her spine. "If this is too much." "It's not too much." She met his eyes, saw her own feelings reflected there. Desire. Fear. Hope. "Is it too much for you?" "No." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not enough." Her breath caught. They swayed together, not quite following the quartet's tempo, lost in their own rhythm. His thumb traced small circles against her spine, sending shivers through her. She felt his heartbeat against her palm on his chest, fast, matching hers. The ballroom faded. The donors. The music. The world. There was only him. Only this. Only the truth neither of them could say aloud. "Claire," he whispered, voice breaking on her name. "I need to tell you something." "What?" Her hand tightened on his shoulder, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. Excuse me." A donor interrupted, smiling obliviously, camera already raised. "Could we get a photo? You two make such a lovely couple." The moment shattered like dropped crystal. They smiled for the camera. Professional. Perfect. The image of a couple that didn't quite exist. But afterward, as the donor walked away, Alex didn't finish what he'd started to say. And Claire didn't ask, because she was afraid of the answer. Afraid he'd been about to confess feelings that would make everything impossible. Or worse, afraid he'd been about to confess something that would ruin this fragile thing between them. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. So they danced in silence, and pretended the almost confession hadn't happened, and let the moment slip away like snow melting in warm hands. Early January brought bitter cold, and the fifth event, a New Year's celebration at a waterfront venue with 200 guests instead of 60. Claire's promotion had been officially approved. This was her first major showcase, her chance to prove she deserved the title of events director instead of just coordinator. Everything had to be perfect. Alex had been preparing for weeks. The menu was ambitious, a culmination of everything they'd built together. 7 courses. Wine pairings. Signature cocktails. He'd transformed the waterfront venue's industrial kitchen into something magical, and Claire had fallen a little more in love with him every time she saw him lost in creation. She should have known it was too perfect to last. Marcus Beaumont arrived an hour before doors opened, not as a guest this time, but as something worse. He walked directly past security, past volunteers, straight to the small backstage area where the foundation board waited with Claire. He had a projector remote in his hand and a smile like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. "Good evening," he said pleasantly. "I have something I think you'll all find very interesting. It's about your chef." Claire's stomach dropped, ice flooding her veins. "Mr. Beaumont, this is a private event. You need to leave." "Oh, I think your donors will want to hear this." He clicked the remote. The screen behind him flooded with images. Alex in a tuxedo on a red carpet, surrounded by celebrities. A Forbes magazine cover, 30 under 30, the new face of fine dining. Alex shaking hands with a mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Alex in pristine white chef's coat inside a kitchen with 3 Michelin stars gleaming on the door. And above that door, in letters so large they filled the screen, Carrington. "Meet Alexander Carrington," Marcus said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "Heir to the Carrington restaurant empire. 12 Michelin-starred establishments across 5 cities. Net worth north of $50 million. And for the past 5 months, he's been playing dress-up as your little charity chef." The room went deathly silent. Claire couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The images on the screen blurred, doubled, refused to make sense. That wasn't Alex. That couldn't be Alex. Alex was a freelance chef who worked for modest wages because he believed in the cause. Alex needed this job. Alex was MS. Morgan hired him believing he was a struggling cook named Alex Morgan, Marcus continued, each word a knife. When really, he's been slumming it for kicks. Probably material for his next interview. How the rich pretend to be poor to feel alive. Board members started murmuring. Donors in the main ballroom craned their necks to see what was happening. And through the crowd, pushing through stunned volunteers and shocked caterers, she saw him. Alex. No. Alexander. Alexander Carrington. Standing frozen in his chef's whites, face drained of all color, eyes locked on hers with an expression of pure devastation. He'd lied. For 5 months. About everything. The room tilted. Her vision tunneled. Claire. He started moving toward her, hand outstretched. Please, let me explain. Don't. Her voice came out broken, barely recognizable as her own. Don't come near me. I can explain everything. Please, just give me a chance to, everything? She laughed, the sound hysterical even to her own ears. You lied about your name. Your background. Your entire existence. For 5 months. What is there to explain? I lied about my name, he said desperately, still moving closer. Not about who I am. Not about anything that matters. Not about us. US? The word felt like glass in her throat. There is no us. You're Alexander Carrington, heir to a fortune. I'm the idiot who hired you thinking you actually needed this job. I did need it, he said, voice breaking. Not for money. For meaning. For what? Material for your next Forbes interview? She couldn't stop the words, couldn't stop the pain from pouring out. Was any of it real? The soup? The conversations? The way you looked at me? All of it was real, he said, close enough now that she could see tears in his eyes. Every moment. Every word. Every feeling. I fell in love with you, Claire. That was never a lie. The confession should have meant something. Should have changed everything. But Marcus was still talking, poisoning the air. Clearly MS. Morgan's judgment is compromised. If she can't see through such an obvious deception, can the board really trust her to manage foundation funds? To make sound financial decisions? To represent this organization professionally? Board members nodded. Whispered. Looked at her with disappointment and doubt. Her career. Everything she'd built. Everything she'd fought for. Crumbling. The contract is terminated, she said, forcing the words out through a throat tight with unshed tears. You need to leave. Now. Claire, please. He was close enough to touch her now, hand reaching toward her face. She stepped back. Leave. Let me explain. Let me prove, leave. Her voice rose, sharp and loud enough to silence the entire room. He flinched as if she'd struck him. For a long moment, he just stood there, hand still outstretched, eyes searching hers for something. Forgiveness. Understanding. Hope. She gave him nothing. Couldn't. Because if she looked at him too long, she'd cry. If she let him touch her, she'd break. If she listened to his explanations, she might believe them. And she couldn't afford to believe anything he said ever again. Finally, he lowered his hand. Nodded once. And turned away. She watched him walk through the crowd, watched volunteers and caterers step back like he was contagious, watched him disappear through the service entrance. The man she'd fallen in love with. Gone. Except he'd never really existed at all. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Marcus stood near the projector looking smug. Board members clustered together, already discussing damage control. And Claire stood there in her green velvet dress, surrounded by 200 people, utterly alone. 3 weeks passed. The longest, emptiest 3 weeks of Claire's life. The board had put her on probation pending a full review. Donors questioned her judgment in angry emails and phone calls. The 6th and final event loomed in 2 days, and she still didn't have a chef. She'd tried. God, she'd tried. Called every contact, checked every platform, reached out to culinary schools and catering companies. Everyone was either booked, too expensive, or had heard about the incident and didn't want to be associated with her questionable decision-making. The event was going to be a disaster. Her career was over. And she couldn't even bring herself to care because all she could think about was him. The way his hands moved when he cooked, reverent and precise. The sound of his laugh when she'd said something that surprised him. The warmth of his palm against her back as they danced. The devastation in his eyes when she'd told him to leave. I fell in love with you. That was never a lie. She'd replayed those words 1,000 times, turning them over in her mind like stones in her palm, searching for hidden angles, secret meanings. Had it been real? Any of it? The soup he'd brought her at midnight. The way he'd learned how she took her coffee. The gentleness in his voice when he asked about her work, really listening instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. Had that been Alexander Carrington slumming it for entertainment? Or Alex Morgan showing her who he really was beneath the lies? She sat in her apartment, staring at her laptop, fighting the urge to cry for the 100th time that day. A knock on her door startled her from spiraling thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her roommate was at her boyfriend's. The foundation director had stopped calling after the third voicemail went unanswered. She opened the door. Alex stood there. No, Alexander. She had to remember who he really was, had to protect herself from the fiction she'd built around him. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under red-rimmed eyes, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down instead of the perfectly pressed clothes she'd grown used to seeing him in. "I know you don't want to see me," he said before she could slam the door. His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "But please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Every rational part of her screamed to refuse. To protect herself. To maintain the anger that was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. But she stepped back. Let him in. Because despite everything, she needed to understand. Needed to know if any of it had been real. He entered slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, and set a thick folder on her small kitchen table. "I need to show you something," he said quietly. She crossed her arms over her chest. "I don't want to hear excuses." "Not excuses. Evidence." He opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, contracts, receipts, photographs, letters. A paper trail of truth. "This is the original ad I posted," he said, pointing to a printout. "No mention of Carrington. Just my skills and availability. Because I wanted to be hired for what I could do, not who my family is." She looked. It was exactly as he described. Simple. Honest in its own deceptive way. "This is the contract we signed." He flipped pages with mechanical precision. "I used Morgan because that's my mother's maiden name. The only part of my identity that wasn't connected to my father's empire. I didn't lie about my experience. Every skill I listed, I have. Every certification is real. My technique, my training, all of it was honest. Just not my last name." More pages. "These are receipts. Every time you tried to pay me extra for overtime or special requests, I donated it. To the foundation. Anonymously. You didn't know because I didn't want you to feel obligated or confused. The work mattered. Not the money." He pulled out a stack of letters, handwritten on various scraps of paper. Letters from the kitchen staff at all 5 events. "I asked them to write down their experience working with me. Read them. Please." She picked up the first one, hand trembling slightly. "A sous chef from the 3rd event, the Thanksgiving fundraiser. Alex was the most respectful chef I've ever worked with in 15 years. He learned everyone's names, asked about our families, our lives outside work. When I made a mistake on the plating, he fixed it himself and never mentioned it to anyone. Never yelled, never embarrassed me. That's rare in this industry. Really rare. He treated us like equals, like our work mattered. I'd work with him again in a heartbeat." Another one. "A server from the December gala. He stayed 3 hours after the event helping us clean up and break down equipment. Didn't have to. Just did it because he said teamwork matters. Then he tipped us all from his own money when Ms. Morgan wasn't looking. $200 each. That's more than we make in a night usually. He's good people." Another. And another. All saying the same thing in different words. Respect. Kindness. Authenticity. Her throat tightened. "I lied about my last name," Alexander said quietly, voice raw with emotion. "I'm not proud of that. I'm ashamed. But I didn't lie about caring about this work. About respecting you and everyone we worked with. About everything between us being real." She looked up at him through blurred vision, saw tears streaming down his face unchecked. "Why?" she whispered. "Why hide it? If you're this wealthy, this successful, why work for nothing? Why pretend?" "Because I needed to know I was worth something without the name." His voice broke. "Because every relationship I've ever had, romantic or professional, has been colored by Carrington. People see the empire, the money, the connections. Never just me. And I needed to know if I removed all of that, would anyone value me? Would you value me? Or was Vanessa right when she called me a talentless Nepo baby riding daddy's Michelin stars?" The pain in his voice was so raw it physically hurt to hear. That's not fair, she said, her own voice breaking. You didn't give me the choice. You didn't let me decide if I could separate you from your name. You made that decision for me. I know. He stepped closer, hands raised slightly as if approaching something fragile. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Claire. I should have told you after the first event. After the second. Every day I didn't tell you made it worse, made the lie bigger. But I was terrified. Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me. Really saw me. My work. My integrity. My heart. You valued me for what I did, not what I inherited. And I couldn't give that up. I was selfish and wrong and I hurt you. But please believe me when I say the feelings were real. A tear slid down her cheek, hot against cold skin. You saw me too, he continued, voice thick. You saw someone who wanted to do meaningful work. Who cared about treating people with dignity. Who could cook with love instead of ego. That's what I fell in love with. Your honesty. Your kindness. Your dedication to helping people who have nothing. The way you care so deeply it actually hurts you sometimes. And I ruined it by lying. You fell in love with me? The question came out barely audible. Completely. He didn't look away, didn't hedge. Terrifyingly. The kind of love that makes you want to be better than you are. To deserve someone. I love you, Claire. I love your passion and your stubbornness and the way you notice when people are struggling. I love that you brought pens to events because you knew donors might need them. I love that you remember everyone's names and thank the cleanup crew personally. I love everything about you. And I destroyed any chance of you believing that by building our relationship on a lie. She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe around the pressure in her chest. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, voice dropping to almost a whisper. I know I hurt you in a way that can't be fixed with apologies. But the 6th event is in 2 days, and you need a chef. Let me cook for you one more time. Not as Alexander Carrington with all his resources and connections. Not as Alex Morgan hiding behind a half-truth. Just as someone who loves you and wants to help you succeed. Let me give you this one last thing. Then I'll walk away if that's what you need. She should say no. She should protect herself. She should hold on to her anger like a shield. But she looked at the documents spread across her table. The care he'd taken to prove himself. The letters from people who had no reason to lie. The evidence of who he'd been when he thought no one was watching. And she looked at him. Really looked. Past the expensive haircut and the bone structure that belonged in magazines. Past the lies and the hurt. To the man underneath who'd brought her soup at midnight and learned how she took her coffee and danced with her like she was the only person in the world. One condition, she said finally, voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Anything. No more lies. Ever. About anything. Even small things. Even things you think don't matter. Complete honesty from this moment forward. No more lies, he promised, and the relief in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Starting now. My real name is Alexander James Carrington. I'm 38. I inherited my family's restaurant empire when I was 28 after my father's heart attack. I've spent the last 7 years trying to prove I'm more than that inheritance, more than the name on the door. I posted that ad because I needed to know I had value beyond my connections. And then I met you, and you showed me I did. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Claire. The realest thing. And I love you. Completely. Honestly. Forever. She closed her eyes. Took a breath. Let his words settle into the cracks in her heart. Then opened them and met his gaze. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. You can cook the 6th event. We'll work together. Professionally. Just professionally? Hope and fear warred in his expression. She stepped closer. Close enough to see the individual stubble on his jaw, the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, the pulse hammering in his throat. Ask me again after the event. When we're not employer and employee anymore. When the contract is complete. When it's just you and me with no professional complications. And if I ask you then? His voice was barely audible. Then maybe I'll tell you that I fell in love with a chef who brought me soup at midnight and danced with me like I mattered. Who cooked with his whole heart and treated people with dignity. A man who made me laugh and made me feel seen. And that man was always you, Alexander. Whether you were using your real name or not. The person I fell in love with was real, even when the name wasn't. His hand came up slowly, trembling, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His palm cupped her face, warm and gentle and achingly familiar. 2 more days. 2 more days, she agreed, leaning into his touch despite every self-preservation instinct screaming at her. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she could breathe again. The 6th and final event was everything they dreamed it could be. The ballroom was full, 300 guests instead of 200. The food was extraordinary, each course a perfect balance of technique and heart. Claire stood at the podium giving her speech about the foundation's impact, and she'd never felt more confident, more certain of her purpose. Because she knew who she was now. What she'd built. What she stood for. And beside her, supporting her without overshadowing, was someone who saw all of that and loved her anyway. Halfway through the evening, Marcus Beaumont tried one final play. He approached the board of directors during cocktail hour, voice loud enough to carry to nearby donors. "I hope you're reconsidering your leadership choices," he said with false concern. Given Ms. Morgan's poor judgment with her previous chef. Falling for such an obvious deception raises serious questions about her ability to manage donor relationships and foundation resources. Claire tensed, ready to defend herself. But before she could speak, Alexander stepped forward. "Actually," he said calmly, voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded kitchens and boardrooms, "Claire's judgment was impeccable." Marcus sneered. "She hired you under false pretenses. She had no idea who you really were. She hired someone she found online who had the skills she needed, the integrity to do excellent work, and the dedication to treat this opportunity with respect. I provided all 3. My family name doesn't change the quality of the meals I prepared, the hours I worked, or the respect I showed her team." He looked directly at Marcus with controlled disdain. "The only person here with questionable judgment is you. Trying to destroy someone's reputation and sabotage a charitable organization because you couldn't poach a chef you wanted." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered donors. Claire stepped forward, finding her voice. "Alexander is right. I hired a chef who cooked brilliantly, treated people well, and helped make these events successful beyond our expectations. His last name doesn't change any of that. And honestly, the fact that someone of his caliber and resources chose to work with us, chose to dedicate his time and talent to this cause, says more about his character than anything Marcus could say diminishes it." Genuine applause. Warm, supportive, real. The foundation director stepped forward, voice firm. "Mr. Beaumont, your behavior has been inappropriate and unwelcome at multiple events. You've disrupted our fundraisers, harassed our staff, and made baseless accusations. You need to leave immediately, or I'll call security." Marcus's face went red. "This is absurd." "I was trying to help you avoid security," the director said calmly, gesturing to 2 uniformed guards. They escorted him out. Claire watched him go, felt Alexander's hand find hers, squeezed gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right," he whispered back. The event ended 2 hours later. Perfect. Triumphant. Complete. The foundation raised twice their goal. Board members approached Claire with apologies and congratulations. Donors praised both the organization and the chef whose Carrington name apparently made them feel even better about their contributions. And when the last guest left, when the catering staff had finished cleaning and the venue stood empty except for scattered champagne glasses and wilting flower arrangements, Claire found Alexander in the kitchen. He was wiping down counters, just like he had after that very first gala 5 months ago. Some things hadn't changed, even when everything else had. "So," she said, leaning against the doorframe, heart hammering in her chest. "This is the end of our contract." He looked up, set down the towel, walked slowly toward her with an expression of such hope and fear it made her ache. "It is," he agreed, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Which means I'm not your employee anymore." "No," she said, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "You're not. Which means I can do this." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "If you'll let me." He closed the distance between them slowly, telegraphing every movement, giving her 1,000 chances to pull away. She didn't. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. "Claire Morgan," he whispered. "I love you. Not because you're convenient or useful or good for my image or my ego. But because you're brilliant and kind and fierce and you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Will you give me a real chance? Let me prove this is real. She smiled through tears. On one condition. Anything. You have to cook for me sometimes. Not for work. Not for events. Just because. Just us. He laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. I think I can manage that. I make pretty good soup. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, Alexander. I'll give you a chance. A real one. He kissed her then. Slow and gentle and absolutely perfect, like coming home after being lost. She tasted salt from their combined tears, felt the tremor in his hands as they cradled her face, felt the racing of his heart against her palm on his chest. This wasn't heat or urgency or performance. This was truth. Finally, completely, devastatingly true. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and slightly dazed, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth this, he said. You already did, she replied. 5 months ago. With honesty in your cooking, even when the rest was lies. He smiled against her lips. Best decision I ever made. Posting that ad. Best decision I ever made, she countered. Taking a chance on someone I didn't know. You know me now. All of me. The good and the terrible and everything in between. I know, she said. And I love you anyway. Even the Carrington part? Especially the Carrington part. Because it's yours, and you're mine. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she melted into him, into the promise of something real and true and finally possible. And there, in the empty event kitchen where everything had started with a lie and a desperate hope, they held each other and knew this was only the beginning. 18 months later, Claire stood in the test kitchen at the Hamptons estate, watching Alexander plate a new dish he'd been perfecting for weeks. Their kitchen. Their home. The afternoon sun slanted through the same windows where he'd stood alone and empty 2 years ago. But everything was different now. The copper pots gleamed not with expensive emptiness but with regular use. The marble counters bore the small scars of daily cooking. Herbs grew in the window boxes. Photographs covered the refrigerator, held by magnets shaped like vegetables. This space that had once felt like a mausoleum had become a home. The foundation had promoted her to executive director. She ran the charity events from a real office now, with actual funding and a team of 3 coordinators who looked to her for guidance. And Alexander cooked pro bono for every single event, his Carrington name opening doors that stayed open because of their combined hearts and vision. Taste this, he said, offering her a fork with a perfectly composed bite. She took it, closed her eyes, let the flavors bloom across her tongue. Perfect. You always say that. Because you're always perfect. Liar, he teased, but his eyes were soft as he watched her. She set down the fork, walked around the counter, wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against the warmth of his back. I love you, she said. For exactly who you are. Carrington name and borrowed identity and midnight soup and everything. He turned in her arms, pulled her close, kissed her forehead with the tenderness that never failed to make her chest ache. I love you too. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. She pulled back enough to look up at him. This man who'd lied to her and then spent every day since proving his truth. Who'd been willing to sacrifice his pride, his secrets, everything, just for a chance to make things right. We found each other, she said. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Best partnership I've ever had. Wait until you see the proposal I'm working on for the fall gala, she said, reaching for her tablet on the counter. I think we can double our impact if we, Claire. What? The gala can wait. He took the tablet gently from her hands, set it aside, pulled her back against his chest. Right now, I just want to hold you. She relaxed into him, breathing in the scent of herbs and warmth and home. Okay. They stood there in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by copper pots and the smell of fresh basil, his arms around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, and neither needed to say anything else. Outside, the Atlantic crashed against the cliffs. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other through deception had built something honest. Something real. Something that would last forever. Because sometimes love doesn't start with truth. Sometimes it starts with a desperate lie and a hope for something more. But it becomes real when you're brave enough to strip away the fiction and stand naked in your truth, trusting that the person you love will see you, all of you, and choose to stay anyway. Claire had chosen to stay. And Alexander had spent every day since proving she'd made the right choice. If you stayed until the end, I invite you to subscribe. It costs nothing and means everything to this channel. I'd love to know how this story touched you. On a scale from 0 to 10, how did it make you feel? Leave your number in the comments. I truly read them all, and tell me, where are you listening from? Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next story.